Welcome to the Tenkara Angler Podcast. Today I'm talking with Jonathan Antunez about fishing wet flies on fixed line gear. If you like what you hear, please don't forget to subscribe. Thanks, and enjoy.
Hi, my name is Jonathan Antunez. I fish in sunny Colorado. Been here for about 7 years now. It's mostly Tenkara, fishing Tenkara for the most part. Um, and yeah, that's about it. What else is there to say?
All right.
That's all there is to me, really. I don't even want to talk about my job right now.
All right. Well, we don't have to talk about your job. So cool. This is Jonathan, and just for complete disclosure,
Sure.
I sat down with Jonathan a couple weeks ago and to record this, and thought we recorded it, and I don't know if I didn't record it or I lost it somehow. Anyway, if you're hearing this now, it worked this time round. So I appreciate Jonathan's patience and willingness to sit down with me again. This is going to be a supersized edition of Tenkara Moves, the new series I'm trying to do with for Tenkara Angler. I did Amanda Hoffner already, and now we're going to be talking to Jonathan here. This one is kind of an indulgent episode for me. That's why it's longer, because like Jonathan, I love wet flies and swinging wet flies especially. And fished with him a little bit in Wisconsin, talked to him, and I know he was doing it out there when we were there. And ever since then, though, I've wanted to have a more in-depth conversation. So today we're going to talk a little bit about wet flies, how to fish them, how to rig when you fish them, rods, lines, the kinds of flies, the kinds of things you might do. So to start off, why don't you tell us, Jonathan, describe when you head out and you're going to be swinging wet flies, tell us where you're going, what the water looks like, just put it all in context for us.
Sure. Well, mostly what I'm looking for is water that is not what you would think of for Tenkara. It's more of a slower moving water, slower pace. Definitely a lot flatter. This water back here, if you can see that, there's definitely some spots there that are really nice and smooth. And I find that I try to time my experiences on the water with hatching. It makes it a lot easier, especially to do the kind of thing that I want to do, which is fishing right along the top, usually downstream, and just manipulating those flies in the surface. So really what I'm looking for is something that's not too fast. It's kind of like that chalk stream kind of vibe to it, or like what you would expect out of something like the driftless. There's quite a few places there that are really great for swinging a wet fly. Yeah, I had a lot of fun there, actually. That was a pretty amazing place. It's ideal for wet flies. And what's really nice about this water is not a lot of people do what I'm doing on this water. Most of the time when I see people fishing the South Platte, they're usually fishing with a bobber, with an indicator, and a few bead heads, usually really, really small stuff. Mm-hmm. But there's bigger bugs that hatch, and I see rarely people taking advantage of that when it happens. Usually people are putting on dries, and dries, yeah, they work okay, but you catch you get a lot more hits and a lot more exciting hits if you fish it wet.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear you talk about the bugs again, because coming from as a fly fishing angler before taking up Tenkara, like the whole idea of fly fishing, before I started fly fishing, I didn't know about aquatic life. I didn't know that you could look at what bugs were in a stream, what crustaceans, and judge what the water quality was like. You know, this idea, like I would go trout fishing or stock streams, wild streams, and it was all just sort of black box. Didn't really have any way to gauge one stream from another. And so I loved, you know, I got real into matching the hatch and really trying to match the hatch, following the hatches, hitting them on purpose. And then in Tenkara, that's kind of almost taboo among certain people. You know, like if you bring up that idea, right, that
Sure.
you're looking for hatches. So it's cool to hear someone talking about it, looking for the insect activity and acknowledging that the trout are acting differently and they're going to behave differently when there's bugs hatching.
Sure. And you know, those bugs behave in a certain way. And you know, like for instance, when the yellow sallies start to come off, you know, later in the season, you start to notice how they hatch, and they're pretty clumsy. They're not really great at hatching. So, you know, and the ones that we have here, they don't crawl up to the edges to hatch. They actually come up, you know, in a pretty leisurely flow. They'll come up through the water column and hatch right out of the water. And when they do this, uh, it's almost like they're in a hurry, but they don't dry their wings out very well because they'll sit there and I've watched them just, you know, plop, plop, and they'll fly a little bit and plop right back down in the water. And I'm just waiting, you know, waiting for, you know, trout to take advantage of this, and they do. But you know, how do you mimic that? You know, and you find ways. You know, you take there. I think sometimes when fish are, you know, when it's gotten to that point where you know they see that all the time, it's very easy to fool them. You know, you just have to somewhat do what that bug is doing, and it you know they'll be like, yeah, I'm familiar with that activity. You know, yeah.
So, just so for people who don't know, yellow sallies are a small stonefly,
Right.
and
And most of them do hatch, you know, by crawling to the edge.
right, they crawl to the edge, and you'll see if you look along the rocks, you'll see the you know the exoskeletons kind of clinging to the rocks. If you're not a bug person and haven't looked, you know, gone down that pathway, next time you're out, look on the, you know, the rocks, and you may see them, and those are the stoneflies. The yellow sallies are fairly small, right? 14, 16.
Yeah, 14, 16s. They can get smaller as the season goes on. But yeah, it's my water in particular, you really have to pay attention because it's a tailwater, and the bugs can be sizable, but most of the time they're really small. And you know, just being cognizant of that, it does make a difference. Like, you know, I was having a hard time on Saturday of just, you know, trying to catch fish, and none of my size 16s were working. Like nothing small was working, and I didn't understand why until I, you know, we did a little bit of signing, and we found out, oh, you know, these bugs are huge. I should be using something bigger. And, you know, you start to see the dries too. The dries are like size 16. So, you know, you go up one size for the nymph. And, you know, I was fishing size 14s in March. I was ecstatic.
Look, I'm really looking forward to the sulfurs and, you know, other things coming that are, you know, a little more sizable.
Yeah. That must be nice. We don't have sulfurs here, but
Yeah, that's the
yellow
one.
does become a very prominent color, though.
Yeah, the sulfur hatch is like the one big, like one I, you know, that's the one hatch I always would try to get to. And it's pretty prolonged. A couple different species, a bigger one earlier in the, you know, be like May. I mean, things are getting earlier and earlier, so who knows? But usually around the first week of May, you'd see the bigger ones, and then different species towards the end that were a little smaller. So like 16s down to 18, something like that.
Sure.
But nice and pretty, beautiful. If you've never seen them, they're just beautiful. And all those different streams, you probably noticed this out there, like the different streams have slightly different color bugs. You know, some they're more orange, some they're more yellow. I've even seen some that are have some olive, you know, mixed in with them. So they're all kind of a little different. But yeah, I'm not afraid to admit it. I still love bugs, picking up rocks and looking at bugs, that kind of
That's
thing. And I
great.
think like if you come to Tenkara, it's one thing that you might miss out on. I don't think that like I said before, it doesn't get talked about a lot. Just for the heck of it, if you're new to fly fishing, you're coming to it through Tenkara, you may not hear a lot about it, but pick up
Mhm.
rocks and look under there and see what what the heck it is that you're imitating.
Right.
Look at the rocks.
Right. And
It
as
could be
you know, as a wet fly fisherman, you really do have to pay attention to um, like how different bugs hatch.
Mhm.
Because uh, a pale morning dun, right? They're they're very slow to hatch. Uh, Sometimes they'll just sit there in the surface and struggle, you know, uh, for quite a while until they can finally, break out. And you may not notice it right away, but if you do a little bit of research, you'll find this information, you know, that they don't really hatch very quickly. So a super active presentation doesn't really work very well for them. Most of the time, what works better is a dead drift, right? Um, Now, a blue-winged olive, on the other hand, they're great swimmers, very fast. And there's been times where I'm just dragging this fly across the surface, and they are picking it up. Like I'm honestly pushing the limits of what I think is reasonable, for these little guys, and they're very quick. And these fish know it, and they're moving to the surface pretty fast for these guys, you know, because they're really good at hatching, you know. So we kind of have to you kind of have to really pay attention to those little details, because you could have exactly the right pattern, but because it's moving too quickly, or it's too slow, they might not see it as something legitimate to eat. You know.
Right, right. Yeah, and that's a good point. And I always like back when I was running through it was Tenkara and I was giving presentations, I would talk about like um being like approaching it like a child in the sense that like if you gave a kid a rod and said this is supposed to be a bug at the end
Hmm.
of this line, make it be a bug, right? They would try all sorts of stuff, right?
Sure.
That tried moving it slow, moving it fast, doing, and so short of having the experience on the water and knowing what's hatching and what it does, you can learn a lot by messing around, right?
Oh yeah. It's funny because in bass fishing, it's almost exactly the same. In bass fishing, you could be moving it a certain way and you're not picking up any fish. And right next to you is a bunch of kids that are just absolutely slaying it. And you're like, what in the world am I doing wrong? Like, and I went over there and I asked, how are you guys catching these fish, man? It's like, oh, we're just kind of like letting it sink to the bottom and just like slow dragging it, like right across the bottom, like not even lifting. No lifting, just drag. And I was like, I'll be darned.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's funny. My introduction kind of to successful wet fly fishing was an accident. And then years ago, when I moved to Maine and there was like a lot of trout fishing, obviously, but where I lived, there was a lot of smallmouth bass fishing in
Mhm.
moving water, and I was kind of fishing for them like I was fishing for trout. I was not having any luck, I'm just not catching fish. So this was pretty early in my fly fishing career, and so I went and bought a bunch of night crawlers, and I went to the river. I'm just like trying to find fish, I'm like, where are the fish? And I put a night crawler on, tossed it out. Before it, I mean, as soon as it hit the water, spam, a fish. I went through 12 night crawlers in 12 casts, 12 fish, So I'm like, well, the fish are here. So, so I'm doing, and so I still didn't know how to fish for them. But what happened was I cast out a woolly bugger and this guy was fishing started talking to me and it was sitting on the bottom. It just fell down and it sat on the bottom of the stream and just sitting there and I'm talking to him and something took it, you know? And so I was like, well, maybe that's what they need, And so then I heard somewhere once, if you're not catching smallmouth, slow it down, So I learned,
Mm.
and it's going to be different times, but in that case, I would just let the fly sit on the bottom. No, I just wait, maybe twitch it a little bit, something I
Yeah.
wouldn't do for trout. Maybe work for trout too. I don't know, but yeah, it was just kind of an accident,
So there's times, especially like when it's really cold or early morning. Um, you just cast it out and just let it sit. Just let it swing. Just let it sit there. Like, don't even do anything to it. Just sit there and hold it. You know, and then just maybe every once in a while just drop it and bring it back up again, just to give it a little motion. You know, it works great. Because they're just not awake yet. They're just not ready to chase. You know, so
Interesting.
there's times
Yeah.
where that works. And someone was telling me that fish don't like smaller fish being in their territory, especially because there's like a pecking order, right? So they don't. If that big fish is just sitting right there at the very head of the pool, like deep, and there's this tiny little fish just feeding away, feeding away. Well, guess what's going to happen to that little fish? He gets so irritated with the dang thing. He's like, get back, get to the back of the line, you know? And he just like, will attack. I don't know if that's what they're really thinking, but I mean, it's almost like a constant irritation for them. It's like this fish isn't respecting me, so, and it does work. Like you just set it right at the front of the pool and just kind of like, just like even like, Pass Lake, a little Pass Lake streamer, just kind of sit there and just, every once in a while, just jump it. And man, it does catch some really nice fish.
Have you had this experience? So this is one thing I've learned just from doing it. I'll swing say I'm swinging a wet fly. Often it is a Pass Lake. Swinging that across the pool, I'll get a hit. They miss it, and I'll let it sit. After I get that miss, it kind of reaches the end of the swing, and I'll let it sit there. And like often those fish, I don't know if it's the same fish. I'm thinking it is though. It'll hit that again. It'll come back and it'll hit it again.
Yeah.
So if you that's one thing I know. If you get that like that nip, and you miss them, don't just pick it up right away and throw it back where you hit it. You can let it dangle there for a little bit. And I've had them, not all the time, but pretty often. I don't know, have you had that happen?
Yeah, well, they stun it, or it's like almost like, oh, I hit it, and as long as they didn't get a point in them, they're like, oh, this thing now this thing's easy pickings,
Yeah, that makes sense.
Why wouldn't they? Bass do the same thing,
Yeah. So we got into a little bit of the tactics already, which is cool. So if you're going out for a day of, you anticipate you're gonna be swinging wet flies, what kind of rod and rigging are you usually setting up with?
Right. So for my water, I usually stick to around 13 foot. Obviously the 395 Nissan Honryu Oni is probably one of my favorite rods for that water. I've also been using the Tenkara Bum 40 and the Kamakatsu Suimu recently. And I love that rod. That's also a 400. So there's, that range is usually pretty nice. Just get away with the longest rod that you possibly can. And suit it for the water that you're fishing. I use those larger rods because they give me leverage. The Dragon Tail Ragnarok is another good choice, also a 400 rod. And those, all of those rods will do exactly what you want them to do with this technique. The idea though is that you really want to have the long rod reach angle, right, and the light line coming down. So you need something like a level line. And depending on how clear your water is and how low your water is, you want to kind of take that into account when you're doing this kind of downstream presentation. The reason for that is because I'm a big believer in tap tap. I think it's one of the most underrated techniques out there, especially for tiny little wet flies. If you're just swinging it across and you're tapping, what's going to happen is that line is just moving like this. It's really it's dancing, right? Well, if it's too bright and if the water's too clear, you're going to have a hard time. You're going to just use and if you use too long of a tippet, you might not get the results that you want at the end, right? So you want it to be somewhat tight, basically about 2 foot long at most, right? So what I'll do is, like fishing, I like to fish this moss green line, and the moss green is like it's a stealth line. What you can also do if you can't find the stealth green, which I think we talked about it in the last one, it's kind of hard to get. There is a company in Japan who's selling it now. Used to be Valken. You can't really get it anymore. You can get their brand, but you have to go through Keiji at Tenkara. So if you're willing to do that, he's definitely willing to help you out. Um, that line is great because my water is constantly very low and very clear. So, the way that I feel like I can get away with some of the things that I do is because of that line. Because that line is just very stealthy. It's like a milky green color. The other thing that you can do is use like a like a clear fluorocarbon line, or maybe like something they sell some that's like camo, you know, like maybe like a 12 pound, or maybe something like, 16 pound, or I don't know, whatever size is equivalent to a 3.5, or or whatever line you want to cast, right? Um, Normally I use 3.5 because that's what I can get, of this nice line. You can use a clear one. You just got to mark it with the Sakura markers. Just take a white marker or whatever color you can see, and just put little white notches on the very tip of the line. Right. What that's gonna do is at least give you an indication of where your line is in relation to your flies. Right. Don't look at the line. The line is the line will tell you nothing. Okay. What you're supposed to be looking at is where you think your flies are. Okay. And so Venables, an angler during like the 1600s, his eyesight was so poor that he would just kind of look in the general area of where he was casting. He was casting a fairly long line of horsehair. It's surprising how long. And just like, whipping that thing out, and he's just watching the area where he thinks those flies are for any kind of motion, for any activity. And that's when he would, just set the hook, and that's kind of what I do. Sometimes I'm fishing one fly, sometimes I'm fishing two flies. The two fly thing is an adaptation from the dibbling style, and it is a style that it's as old as fly fishing itself. Um, it's one of those things where you're basically using one fly to anchor, and the other fly is on a dropper, and it comes off, and that fly is like maybe a little bit more heavily hackled, or maybe it's just another of the same one, you know. But it slightly changes the angle of which that's dragging in the water, and sometimes, so there's a lot of variables that adds to the whole thing, because sometimes the fish isn't too interested in that top dropper, but it's already made the trip up. It usually will take the back one, if they're not too far away from each other, or it'll see the activity of the big one and be like, "What is that?" And just come up to investigate, see the other one, just take it, So that's a variable, or it could go after that one. More often, that's usually what happens. It'll go after the top dropper, and oh man, it's exciting. These fish are launching themselves out of the water to take these flies, sometimes in midair. And man, there's nothing more exciting than that. And that's one of the many things that you can do with a long rod and a light line setup. Especially downstream. Downstream, it works extremely well. And I'll normally fish, like I said, a heavy hackled fly, normally like a cut cliff fly. And the reason I like cut cliffs is because of their shape. They're usually like a cigar shape, almost like a mayfly or something like that, or even like a stonefly. And then it's tied in tip first. So you have hackle, you have a dry fly hackle, right? And that's tied in tip first, and it basically points everything back. You've folded, you've taken the hackle, you folded it, and now everything is facing backwards. Well, that's exactly what an insect looks like when it's fluttering around. It looks like, I sometimes mistake my fly for the natural, you know, because I'll lose track of where my fly is, and I'm like, which one is mine? It's like, oh, okay, there it is, and you see it, just kind of sitting there in the surface, and it's just kind of, looks very, very convincing,
Mhm.
and it is convincing, and that's one of the things you can do when you kind of put two flies into the mix. um, and again, you never know what's going to work. Sometimes they'll take the back fly more than they'll take the front one. And if you take off the front one, they don't take anything at all. So it's like you're almost like baiting them to come up with that one, and then and then it's like the old bait and switch.
Yeah. So that's interesting. And I just want to say, hey folks, if you're going to use more than one fly, make sure they're barbless,
Yeah,
because
for
I
sure.
can't tell you how many times I've gotten like a fish on one or the other, and the other hook ends up like in my arm or in my clothes and my finger.
Yeah,
So that's dangerous. Have you ever used more than two? Like I know in reading some of those old books, those guys, some of them would use,
yeah,
a
five,
whole
10.
slew. Yeah.
Yeah, crazy. I don't think I would ever do that. If I ever use more than two, um, there's a technique. There's a type of North Country spider fishing where they basically attach that straight to the line, and they'll make a loop. They'll make a loop, and then they'll pass that fly through there, and then basically create like a tiny little dropper. But the dropper's connected directly to the line. It's just hanging out at a
Mhm.
perpendicular,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that works really well. It does. It's not for manipulating, that's for sure, but it's good for a dead drift.
Yeah. I mean, I've done a lot of two flies. I used to do three, try to do three flies, but I would just, yeah, it was just too much trouble.
It's
But
a
yeah, I
lot of
like,
circular casting.
yeah, I'm a circular
Open the loop.
caster for the most
Mhm.
part, almost always. And I think
Yeah,
like that developed because I do like to nymph fish, but it's because I don't I'm always under cover. Even like, in the stream behind me, you see in the middle it's open, but that
sure.
canopy goes over, and I'm fishing, the brown trout hug the edges. So I'm up under the trees. I mean, it's very rare that I can do an overhead Tenkara cast, so I've kind of developed that, an oval like Belgian style cast. I
Sure.
probably do it even when I shouldn't, but just habit.
So that's actually what happened to me while I was fishing with Oni last July, and I didn't realize that I was still doing it. Because I'm so used to doing that every single time I go out. Because I'm usually fishing at least one or two flies, and I always would drop my wrist,
Yeah,
just to
yeah.
get that curve, and it was like a little bit of wrist, not that much.
Yeah, it's a hard habit to break when you just used to it, and just for people who don't know, if you've tried to, if you're fishing with more than one fly, if you do an oval cast, it's like a constant tension cast. So
Mhm.
your flies they're always under tension. There's never it's with a regular back cast, you kind of have you got to get the timing a little better. With that oval cast, you're under tension the whole time, and it kind of keeps everything nice and tight, and it's a little more manageable when you've got multiple flies.
Right, and you never want to exceed more than 6 inches for the dropper. And when you tie in your fly, try to tie it in so that the hook point is not facing
Hmm.
the line, the main line. It's facing away, right? So, what I try to do is once I've made my loop and everything else, right, I'll just bring it in, I'll hold the hook point so it's up, then I'll just kind of thread it through the head from the top to the bottom, right? But in reverse. So I was just kind of like, let me see if I can. see if I can grab a hook here. So I don't know if you can see this, but the hook is facing up.
Hmm.
You're just passing it through there. So that way the hook point is away from the main line and it doesn't get tangled as often.
Right, right. That makes sense.
You know.
Yeah, I watched like I don't know if they're still available, but there for a while you could watch the Davy Watton wet fly videos on Amazon for free,
Yep,
and he
yep.
was had a
That's where I
very
learned that.
okay. He had a very
Hmm.
specific way of tying them in. Okay,
Yep.
yeah,
Yeah, and
yeah.
it does work. And the nice thing about those top droppers is you can get away with a bigger mo- uh, monofilament. You could actually use 4X if you wanted to. They're never going to see it.
Yeah.
They definitely won't see it, from below. If you're just kind of dipping that dropper fly in the water, they won't see it.
Now
And that's
I don't know how
different
you
line. I'm
I don't know
sorry.
how you
That's
what knot you use on
mm,
yours, but I so if folks want to tie another one, I usually use a like I'll do a surgeon's knot, and so when you do the surgeons, you're gonna have two tags,
mhm.
um, and in the case of that one, you want to make sure to always put your dropper on the bottom tag so that it's pulling the knot tight rather than
Right.
the other tag where you're kind of cocking the knot and it's gonna uh, put like a bad tension on it to break it. I don't know what knot do you like to use for your dropper?
Yeah, it's never the top one. It's always the
Yeah,
one that faces down. Yeah, because if you put it on the top one, it'll come loose immediately. Like yeah,
and you
that's
may
a
be
story
tempted
for a
to
different
because you're
day.
thinking it would stay out. I've actually seen people say to use the top one because the idea being that it will be like stay out of the way more or something, but don't do that. So what knot do you like to use for your droppers?
So what I'll do is I'll do a triple surgeons just on a piece of line.
Yeah.
Right. So I'll take out my piece of line and cut it, and I'll do a triple surgeons knot and just make a loop. Right. And then I girth hitch that loop above the knot,
Okay.
above like a figure-8 knot, or a figure-8 usually is pretty decent knot, and doesn't really reduce too much of the breaking strength. Um, but what that does is now you have two lines going, creating that juncture. So if you use a big enough line, like maybe like some 5X works pretty well, but 4X too, like 4X works really well, and that'll hold it out at a distance, and then you have obviously your knot is there, and then you just clip the tag in, and then you put your fly, sort of, kind of gauge it how far you want to go. You only get I've only been able to get like maybe two chances
Hmm.
to wrap that thing, and like cut it off and try a different fly before I have to redo the whole thing over again.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that particular one works better for me, because it does hold everything out in a way easier, and it also has the added advantage that it does swivel a little bit. So yeah, it gets tangled less. So I have droppers here, from like I bought them at an estate sale, and they were made, they're made out of some pretty heavy line. It's actually quite impressive. I don't know if they were catching fish on these things, but I was shocked at the size of them. They were considerable. And I know some people too that they fish with 3X for North Country spiders. I'm like, wow, that's a bit too heavy, I think. But what do I know? Well, there's a kind of a nice kind of thing that happens when you have that dropper, is that you can use a pretty sturdy hook. And since we're talking about fixed line, if you use a light wire hook on a big fish, you might have some problems, or you're just going to have to baby that fish in. And that doesn't always lead to the best results. So what's nice about that particular style is that when you can get away with, like a, not necessarily like this, like an extra heavy, but like a normal, like medium heavy hook, and then you can just kind of try your fly onto there, and you can dangle that fly, And sometimes I think it works even better because it kind of makes the fly drag a little bit on the surface. And if you're, if you're tapping as it's dragging, those that the hackle's just doing this, and it looks exactly like a bug that just got stuck, and that drives them nuts. I mean, when the time is right and you see you see the flies doing that or flies that size, they'll take advantage, you know.
Yeah, and I just listen. I think it's like if people, anyone that's listening or watching that hasn't tried swinging dry flies or swinging wet flies in the water, or the technique you're talking about, and hasn't experienced the explosive strikes that you get. Like, I mean, it's fun. I mean, because sometimes the fish just nail it. I mean,
Oh yeah.
there's no doubt about strike detection because you're gonna feel
Yep.
it.
And sometimes you almost have to like stop yourself because don't set the hook so quick, Um, so it's kind of interesting. I've read a couple of things where people are like, oh, yeah, you can fish these flies downstream, but you end up losing a lot of fish. And I'm like, I'm wondering. First of all, it's like because I've lost my share of fish, doing that. Um, but I mean, it's fishing. What you really want to, I have kind of a beef with people that fish like because I need to catch as many fish as possible, you know, and it's just because of that's where they're at, and that's what they really enjoy, and they catch it a certain way, and that's what they like, and that's what they're doing at that time, right? I'm not. I've kind of gotten to that point where I'm like, I don't really need to catch every fish that I present this to. What I really want is I want to see it. I want to see the take. Um, because yeah, I could do just what everybody else is doing on that stream and probably catch more fish than I normally do. But at the end of the day, none of that will mean anything to me because it's just not the game that I like to play,
Mhm.
right? I really want to see it. I want to see something cool, Like I want to see those fish like try to jump out of the water and grab my fly. Who cares if they miss? It's just fun to watch them try, and when they succeed, it's like, man, that was amazing,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know.
it is. It's something.
And
Yeah,
it's totally worth all the fish that whatever that I
yeah.
could have
I mean,
possibly caught on a midge or a nymph or whatever, but never saw them eat.
well, and we're
You
not
know?
we're not. I mean, generally, I'm not keeping fish. So if
Mhm.
I encourage, if a fish bites, hey, that counts. But I think, like, I don't know if you ever. So when I first tried to do wet fly fishing, back in the days before the internet, so there wasn't like you'd read a book and you go and try it, and I never had much luck, and until I used Tenkara rods and light lines, and sometimes I'll actually use like a Euro nymphing line for wet flies because I
Mhm.
like because you can do some manipulation with the line and the fly. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like you can use the current in a fly, but that's still infinitely lighter than those Euro lines that any fly line I had ever like. I mean, it's like
Yeah.
less than the zero weight. It's still a light line.
Yeah.
But what I found was my success with wet flies skyrocketed with a Tenkara rod, and I think a lot of it has to do with when you mentioned losing fish downstream. I don't lose nearly as many fish because when you're fishing with a Western rod and you've got this heavy fly
Correct.
line, yeah, you've got. I mean, when you go to set the hook, most of your activity is pulling line off the water. And,
Yep.
before you get anywhere near the fish,
Yeah.
with that light Tenkara line, you're into the fish like instantly.
Immediately. Yeah.
Yeah,
And the only way that you would miss it is if he missed it
yeah, yeah,
or they missed it, you know?
yeah. So
Um,
if anyone's out there that has like tried wet fly fishing with their Western gear and hasn't loved it, yeah, give it a try because it's like a totally different ball game.
yeah. And that's really I mean, that's what I've discovered from, just fishing. I've seen the technique that they use for wet flies. Um, and it does work. Like I've watched people catch fish on it, so it does work. But um, I don't know. I love how it feels on a Tenkara rod because you're onto them immediately. You don't have to worry about picking up any line.
Right.
Um, the only thing you have to worry about is how far you've brought your rod down. Because if that fish takes it when your rod is facing, straight down from you,
Right.
it's over. Unless that fish decides to shake his head immediately, so you can actually regain a little bit of of the curve, it's gonna pop it off.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
So
probably
there is
worth
a limit. You
Yeah,
know.
yeah. So that's actually a good point, and that's like worth talking about. So if you're swinging a wet fly downstream, you cast out across, say, and I'm swinging it downstream. Um, you have to be cognizant and active and paying attention to the angle of your line to your rod. So like Jonathan says, you don't want to let that line get so that your line and your rod are in a straight line. You want to make sure you've always got some sort of angle
Something.
between your line and your rod tip. So when that fish hits, you don't break it off. Because if you let it dangle straight downstream, and you've got a straight rod, straight to, line straight to tip it, it's going to snap it.
And there is somewhat of a hesitation, and I kind of realized that I was setting the hook way too quick. Um, because I've taken other people fishing there, and they were very slow to set the hook, but they still caught fish. And I was like, huh. I was like, maybe I'm setting it. I'm kind of like almost doing the dry fly set, 'cause fish usually spit a dry fly pretty quick. So I as soon as I see that mouth close, I'll set the hook, But you don't really have to do that with a wet fly. And I've seen people just like very like, oh, I have a fish, I was like, what?
Mhm.
And all they did was lift the rod, They
Yeah,
who
yeah.
knows how long that fish has been on. Um, it's just fascinating stuff. It it really kind of makes you question, like what, like it makes you question like what, how exactly, what am I doing on this water? How can I get better at it? Um, because you get to that certain point where you're like, oh, I've got this down, but if you take somebody new with you and they do something different, and that's the stuff that's kind of hard to teach. And
Mhm.
I think that's why most of the time you don't get the kind of training that you do with a dry fly or a nymph. And I think that's mostly why, you see like in modern fly fishing, the marketing is always towards a dry fly or a nymph, and you're dead drifting this thing, you know. And that seems like it's fairly easy instruction. Just get a good drift and you'll catch fish, right? This is different because this is skill. This is you doing something that directly creates the bite. You're enticing those fish to bite. So it's a little bit more like bass fishing. You're enticing these fish to actually take your fly.
Yeah. Now,
That's not something you can easily teach.
I will say this though, in defense of nymphing. Um,
Mm.
I think it's very similar though. I think what you're describing is there's like this surface that people think nymphing is or wet fly fishing is, and you
Hmm.
can catch fish doing that. But like the more you do it and the better you get at it, you just keep drilling down and you
Yeah.
get better and better. Um, and for instance, the stretch of stream that I fish, I try different things, and there's certain stretches of stream that I wasn't successful fishing. They're slightly different.
Hmm.
It's like my skills got so honed to a particular type of water,
Sure.
and I go to the same stream downstream a quarter mile and it's different. And that stuff isn't working, so you got to so if you're just taking a turnkey system off the shelf that you read about, and that's all, that's going to work sometimes. But when
Sure.
it doesn't work, you're not going to know what to do.
I guess my point was that most of the stuff that they push nowadays is not wet flies.
No, no, no.
because it is something that you have to kind of do it and learn it. You know, it's not something that, you know, there's a lot of information out there about it. Not recent anyways, you know.
No, no, it's true. And I think like I mean I started fly fishing in '92 or something like that, and you constantly see articles about wet fly fishing isn't dead, you know. So it keeps coming around, but I do think like that on with Western gear, like
Sure.
it is harder. Like I think Tenkara makes it easier to be successful. Not that you can't be equally successful, but Tenkara kind of
Sure.
makes it I think a little easier to be successful.
And I believe we're revisiting something we talked about in the first video. Um,
The
sadly,
apocryphal,
the video that Google ate. Um, and that was that these flies were developed for fixed line. Wet flies are from the very beginning, from 280, you know, we get the first description of a fly, you know, and how they were fishing it. It's it's you're talking about wet flies. Wet flies have been the they were the standard for thousands of years, you know, um, until about what 14 or 1860 something,
right?
you know, that the dry fly kind of came along, and then things started to change, right? You had you used to be able to get long rods pretty easy, and now we're split canes and there were the dry fly lines, and nobody likes swinging anymore, like swinging them downstream anymore. Everybody wanted to fish upstream, up the way, and then there was like these rules that were put into place, and then it just became like this almost like archaic type of style. But all of the flies all of the flies before a certain date, they were all wet flies,
Now,
even even if they were tied with rooster.
right, and you're reading like I don't remember. You might have read the same thing, but and it's fairly recent that people realized that the flies they saw actually came from the water. Like they didn't know, you know what I mean? So they see these bugs flying around.
Yeah,
They don't know the life cycle like we do, and most of us wouldn't either if we hadn't read it. Most of us didn't discover that on our own, right? We know it
sure.
because we were told it, we read about it. So a lot of the wet flies they were tied to look like flies that that they
That
saw
they could see.
they
Yeah,
could see, right? And
yeah,
so
and
yeah,
that's
it
why
makes sense that you would
you
be
see them
dapping them and dabbling them on the top because that's what you see. That's what you're.
right, because the mayflies would come back and they
Yeah,
do their thing. So it was just the wet fly was designed for fixed line. Those two are inseparable for ages.
yeah,
And so I feel like the wet fly has kind of been shoehorned into the modern style of fly fishing.
makes sense.
Um, and the heavier line doesn't help. And I'm sure somebody out there is going to be like, well, get all upset with me. I'm sorry, but yeah, no, it's a different game. It really is a very different game uh, when you put a wet fly on a fixed line rod. Um, so this is a horrible story for me because this story ends up with me losing 5 fish that were all personal bests in one morning. But my mistake. I brought a knife to a gunfight, and I was fishing the Dream Stream, and I was not expecting the results that I got. Um, but what I was doing was fishing, North Country Spider, just in the surface for the morning, right? And just early morning, I saw some little bugs hatching. I was like, okay, let me put this on here, give it a try. Same thing I do at Deckers, and just dragging along the top and tapping. I mean, the size of these fish, man, were unbelievable, right? And I just got schooled every single time. Either the hook would bend out, or it would just I'd have it on for a little bit, and then it would finally decide, you know what, enough of this, and just go downstream as fast as I could. And if I couldn't catch up, that was the end of it, the end of the game. And this happened over and over and over again. And on the last fish was on a bigger cut cliff that I tied to look like a crane fly, right? And I just made it big. I tied it on a like a dry fly hook, but a larger one, and longer. Right, it was about maybe 4x long. And I tied this thing really bushy, right? And I'm just kind of sitting there tapping the surface, tapping the fly. What's funny about that is that they didn't like it when I put floating on it. They liked it better when it was stuck in the surface. And having witnessed these crane flies flying around, they just basically hovercraft across the water. And I'm sure that they have already learned that catching one that's doing this is difficult, and probably not worth their time, right? But when that fly hits the water and it gets stuck in the water, man, it's on. Like, as soon as they see that activity, they're just like, I need this thing, This is a good meal, right? And I saw that rainbow come up in the mouth on there. And I did everything I could, everything I knew how to do, to keep that fish on. And I mean, we're talking about like 20+ inch fish, just massive. And I was thinking to myself, it finally, when I, that hook popped right out, after a battle and me running downstream, trying to catch this thing. And I finally I crawled up on top of the high water mark, and I just laid down on the grass, and I just thought to myself, this technique works amazing here, but I can't do this with a fixed line. But the long rod with a light line is the key.
Yeah,
right?
You need to get yourself a 11-foot Euro nymphing rod.
It just doesn't cast level line very well.
Yeah, you can do it though. I mean, I can cast. I have the new rod I got. I'm casting like now. I am beadhead nymphs, but like 18 size 8 small beadhead nymphs. I've been casting like what would be the equivalent of 4x tippet, and that's it.
Yep.
That's the whole line, and it'll cast it. So
interesting.
Yeah. So
with no weight.
There's
with very
that's
little
a tiny.
weight.
Yeah, very little weight. Yeah. I mean, like a heavy hook wet fly would be probably the same weight as like a size 18, little beadhead, similar kind of weight. But yeah, some of them will cast like I've had, decent luck fishing level lines with them. Now they're not going to be great with if it's windy, like
sure,
you're kind of luck, but but you've got but that said, if you're not like, even with a reel, like when you get those, I mean, I was out in Colorado fishing on a frying pan in the toilet bowl, and hooked one of those giant, steelhead sized rainbows. I had a reel, but that didn't help. Because by the time I thought to do anything, because like I didn't think one would bite, just and it's off. I'm into my backing before I like even have time to think. So
yeah,
I didn't. And then same thing on what's the Taylor River. I had the same kind of thing. Like I'm not used to those giant fish. So when I hook one of them, it's kind of even with the reel,
it's pretty wild.
Yeah.
And it's, you don't get much time to react.
No, you don't.
And the reel may or may not help. But I think I think at the very least, it's something that started kicking around in my head. There's some places that I can definitely do this technique, and I'll catch fish all day, and it's fun. It's still a challenge. It's still a challenge to catch bigger fish. Size. Usually the fish that I catch at the South Platte portion, the Deckers portion, it's usually around, anywhere from 16 to 18 inches. That's probably max. And they're used to being caught. So
let's talk about catching fish.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
we had this discussion last time that we lost. So you're using like a 13-foot rod for the water you're fishing. Obviously, be sized appropriately. For someone else, it's fishing smaller, tighter water. But and then a fairly long line. Like what length line are you talking about?
So 13-foot rod usually. So this is depending on the size of the river, right?
Right.
I'll the line that I've been using forever, because I'd never thought that I would find another line like the Vulcan line. I mean, this thing has been with me for like 2.5 seasons, almost 3 seasons now, and still the same length of line. But that level line is around 18 inches long, or
18 feet.
18 feet, 18 feet long. Yeah. So 18 feet long plus 2 feet of tippet, usually gets me around, that 20 foot mark. And that's fairly decent for that. I probably could fish a little bit longer, but you have to realize that the longer the line, it affects it affects the drape a little bit,
Right.
how it presents. So I've kind of found like that sweet spot of presenting this fly in a certain way and the certain length that I have and how far I need to be away from what I'm doing. And it catching fish on catching a bigger fish on fixed line, even though it's not part of the subject, or what we're talking about today. But there's a little bit of an art to it,
Right.
and it's relatively new. This is something that even the old timers were very afraid to do. In fact, they didn't like to talk about it at all. You have Isaac Walton instructing someone that was fishing with him, put the net under the fish, but don't touch the line or we break all. So zero confidence in hand lining. Of course, you're talking about horsehair line. So horsehair line has knots in it going up, and it's furled, right? So it's not necessarily the smoothest line, and all that has to happen is that fish to decide to bolt, and your finger hit one of those knots,
Yeah.
and it's over. It's over.
Right.
So the only instruction that we get is like something like in the 1700s, like 17. I can't even remember, but the guy was like, in fly fishing, you can lay hold of the line, only do so carefully.
Yeah.
That is it. That
Yeah.
is all the instruction that's given. So yeah, hand lining is a big deal. You want to use a long line for these, for fishing downstream, because obviously you want to stay away from their line of sight. Not every place is like Deckers. Not every place the fish are just so used to seeing people that they're not going to spook. So you want to fish a long line. You do want to fish a level line because it's going to make it a lot easier for you to hand line. And when I'm talking about hand line, it's just 2 fingers. And you'll see this often repeated in pictures where if someone is especially the older pictures, someone's hand lining them using like the first 2 fingers because they want to let go immediately, But in this case, what you're doing is you just have a very light touch, and 3 fingers is usually good enough. You just kind of light touch and let it slip. Let it slip. If the fish isn't ready, it's going to tell you. And then, if it's really, really fighting you, just put them right back on the rod. But, this will happen, especially on a bigger fish. As soon as you touch the line for a hand line, just get ready to let go because they're going to flip out. Something about it feels different to them than being on a rod, right? So it's really nice to have somebody actually net the fish for you.
Yeah.
When that's possible. But, hand lining a big fish, you just immediately, as soon as you grab that line, you're going to have to let go because they're going to flip out, right? And then you have to grab it again and just kind of get him used to that. Okay, well, this is what's happening, buddy. So just chill out, chill out, get used to this portion of it, right? And you just kind of line by, little by little, just very smoothly bringing that through. That's something that you could never get away with if you were in the 1600s still using horsehair line.
Right, horsehair, right. And back then, I mean, before, I mean, they were using horsehair tippet, what we would call tippet, like until silkworm became a thing,
Sure.
which is fairly recent. I don't remember when that happened, but yeah, I mean, they were using. I remember in some book he talked about, like they would have like a 2 horsehair was like
Hmm.
their tippet, 2 horses. And I don't know if anyone out there has tried to make a horsehair line. That's not very strong.
It
Two-
isn't.
no.
It isn't. There's certain breeds of horses that create better strength line. Um, and you'll find that out because the horsehair line. This is totally off subject, but the horsehair line is they use it for bows.
Right.
So if you want a bow made for cello or something like that, you want it to be somewhat abrasion resistant. So they recommend like uh, I can't remember the place. Genghis Khan,
Like Mongolia.
Mongolian, yeah. So Mongolian horsehair, right? Because they're hardier, and that's like that's like the most expensive one you can get, and those are technically stronger, right? I couldn't even remember that name. But in any case, yeah, horsehair line is terrible. It's nice to cast. It
Yeah.
really does cast very beautifully. It's
Yeah, I
just
made one. I made one
it's
back in the day, bought I'm sure that it was sourced for violin bows, the
sure.
horsehair that I was using. And yeah, I made it and went out and in very short order got stuck in a tree. And that was the end of that.
Yeah,
But yeah, like it casts like it's beautiful. Cuts.
yeah. It's very organic
Yeah.
feeling, and it's I've fished with it before, and I've caught fish with it. It was much heavier. It was a much heavier line. And it's one that was built for Valsiciana. So their strand goes from like 18 down to 4, and then from 4 they'll connect a bit of like a loop that you can attach some normal tippet to because they're not savages.
I've used this is a little off subject. If anyone hasn't seen it, I'll have to put a link in here. The video is like Yvon Chouinard from
Yeah,
Patagonia with visiting the guy in Italy, and he has that rod. He lives in this apartment in this little village, and to get his rod outside, he has to drop it out of the window,
the window. It's amazing.
and then they put it in like a little Fiat or something, and it's like sticking out of the car.
Yeah,
That's it.
incredible.
Yeah, that's a cool video.
Yeah.
Well, we've gone. What have we gone? About an hour. It looks
Yeah,
like.
looks
So
like.
I guess we got to call it quits. But I could talk another hour. We'll have to do it again because we just kind of scratched the surface, of this topic. I mean, I love it. And the one thing I did want to mention is, or I wanted to ask you about. So I've read the Cutcliffe book. I've just been rereading it,
Mm.
and the colors are always hard in those old books. Like you don't know what the heck they're talking about. The colors they mentioned,
Yeah.
they'll say flax and they're talking about hair, like
Hmm.
from hairs, and
Sure.
he's describing these different colors, and I don't really know what he's talking about. But have you, when you do your Cutcliffe flies, have you tried to emulate any of that, or you're just using colors that make sense for your bugs and your environment?
So just by chance, I have tried a few of them, and a few of them work extremely well. It just happened that way. But I have tried to emulate the bugs that I have, and that's
Yeah.
worked out really well too. And I think that it's always a recommendation. Even some of the North Country spiders, they're not going to look anything like the bugs that we have here. Um, they're built for a different place.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but by all means, experiment, invent, figure out, what does this bug look like when it's flying?
Mhm.
That's something. What does the color look like when it's flying? Because it may not look the same when it's just resting, you know. Uh, like a yellow Sally. A yellow Sally, the wings don't look gray; they look like a yellowish blur. So I always end up using like some kind of a golden badger or a honey like a honey dun, something that's gray in the center, and then like more of a yellowish color towards the edges. And that's how it looks like to me when I
Yeah,
see it fluttering across the surface. So yeah, do
yeah.
do what you want.
Yeah, I'm excited to like. I was reading in there. I'm pretty sure it was in Cutcliffe's book, and he talks about getting the cow fur that was scraped off on the posts.
Yeah,
So my
purple
daughter's
the purple
boyfriend,
cow.
yeah, my daughter's boyfriend works, at the beef. He has cows of his own,
Sure.
shorthorns, and they're red and white and all different, so I'm going to ask him next time he's home to see if he can like round up some of this under, it's probably the under fur that gets stuck on the fences and stuff, and
Yeah,
just
that's what you want. The under fur is a lot easier to deal with.
yeah,
If you clip the fur up the top is just wiry,
right,
just long and somewhat unusable. Just
yeah.
the bottom stuff is better. Yeah,
Yeah, so I'm going to see if I can get some of that. And I just thought, I haven't done that for a while. Talking to you has got me interested. And again, I've read these old books a while ago, some of them, and yeah. But I'm interested, just for fun. Again, trying to
sure.
tie some of that stuff up, And anyway,
Yeah, no,
well,
it's fun.
it was great talking to you, Jonathan. I appreciate you coming back again. And it looks
Sure.
like the recording button is still on. So I
Yeah,
think
I
we've
can
got
see it.
this one. Oh, the last thing, and I asked Amanda this. So I'm going to
Sure.
try to do this every time. You're tying flies, you're headed to the stream, you're putting on some music. What are you listening to?
I am listening usually to the Pillows, which
The
is a J
Pillows.
rock. It's a J rock band.
Okay. I don't know
Yeah,
that one.
they get me amped up.